Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Inside the Comedy Institute. I, of course, am Greg Romero Wilson, and this is the podcast where we just try to address the current issues. I don't want to say challenging the comedy field today, but just everything that everyone's talking about. Recently, we did an episode with Josh Nasser, a comedian turned TikTok star, about the effect of TikTok on stand-up comedy and his ability to, now instead of waiting for people to book him, he can go out and do shows and book his own shows and stuff like that. And it's had a tremendous amount. Obviously, social media has really changed the game for us tremendously. That was that episode. Now, this episode is very interesting. Okay, I'm joined today with Isabel Herrman, a very funny comedian who I've known for quite some time, who recently, she had moved to Austin and recently moved back to Los Angeles. And as we know, Austin has become a recent hotbed of stand-up comedy activity, for better or worse. And a lot of people are considering the move. It used to be in stand-up, there were only two questions: New York or LA. That used to be the questions. And now there's, what about Austin? Should I go to Austin? And so I wanted to cover this topic here today. You, of course, firsthand knowledge. You've been there, you've done that. So now, without further ado, welcome Isabel Herrman. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Greg, happy to be here. Happy to see you.
It's so great to see you too. I know, when I saw you at the Improv, I was like, oh my God, what are you doing here? And then you said you moved back, and I was like, oh my God. I know, I may have been a little overly excited. I was very worked up that evening, but I just finished a good show, and it's one of those things. But I was just so excited to see you back. And then you were telling me just a little bit about it. And the second you started telling me about your experience there, I was like, this is the kind of thing I think a lot of comics right now need to know. Because again, comics right now are thinking about their choices, and not just comics in LA and New York thinking, should I go to Austin? But comics around the country who are trying to decide where to go from their hometown. Should I go, like I said, it used to be New York, used to be LA, but now they're like, oh, maybe I should go directly to Austin. So I want to start by it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, if memory serves, it seemed to me like you moved there right before it became cool.
Right before it became cool, like 6 months before it was this mecca.
Right. Like now, had Joe Rogan already moved there? Did that announcement come like shortly on the heels of you getting there?
He moved right about 6 months after I had gotten there. I had gotten there in the summertime of 2020. And then there was the big announcement that officially Joe Rogan is moving to Austin. But the thing is for someone his size, his like conglomerate company type of thing, he had probably been premeditating that for a while.
Oh, no, probably so. I think a lot of it was just premeditated on the fact that he signed a $100 million deal, and Austin had, it's Texas, no income tax, no state income tax. So that means he got to keep an extra $10 million. So I think that's smart. So I think as he saw the deal approaching, he was planning it. But yeah, obviously, comics didn't start flocking there until he officially moved there. And then there was, so you were there, right? And I have to admit, when you moved there, I was surprised. I mean, obviously it's 2020. Everybody was kind of making moves, just kind of, because the world had changed and we were in this uncertain lockdown world. And so people were just doing whatever they needed to do to survive or get by or whatever. So I found it an interesting move for you, knowing you had had some time in Dallas, knowing that you had had some time, you were from Kansas City, I believe it was. And so I was surprised that you chose, at the time, I found Austin to be a very unique choice at the time. What made you choose Austin at that point, not being part of the great Joe Rogan migration?
Yeah, so I think it was one of those typical comic, whatever, mindsets of, I just want to go. I just want to get out. The pandemic, had been locked down for 3 months at this time. And so I was doing like the Zoom shows or like very scarce, like outdoor things. And it just wasn't popping. And, my whole career is in entertainment and like hospitality entertainment, specifically related to performing and putting on shows and directing. And so I reevaluated what other cities are up and coming and growing that I could kind kind of involve myself in,
Mhm.
everything came up Austin. I mean, a few of my research things came up like Nashville, Chicago.
Mhm, mhm,
I
mhm.
don't like the cold, so I
Mhm.
immediately took out. I do not do well coming from a state that has all of the seasons whenever
Yeah,
they decide to show up. I was like,
yeah.
no, I can deal with heat 9 times out of 10. Um, and so I was like, okay, yeah, Austin is it's only 1 million people or less, and that's
Mhm.
counting the sprawl, which it's Texas. It's huge. Texas is giant. So the landmass alone um, brings a lot of that populace into how big Austin is. And I get there, and I immediately was doing these outdoor shows, these drive-in theater shows, which
Mm.
I don't know if you ever got to do any of these as a
I did one.
comic.
I did one really big one.
And they tell the people you can have it on the radio or you can
Right,
hear it
right,
through the
right.
speakers. But they're like, yeah, if you think something's funny, just like do your windshield wipers or flash your lights or something like that. So you're performing and you're like having like mild strokes because you just get these lights flashing at you, or the
Yeah, yeah, that's weird.
you
Yeah.
know, and it's just like, and I'm like, this is what laughter is now. It felt so surreal. But that was the comedy scene when I got there. And then right about the fall 2020, Austin, Texas was just like pandemic schmandemic. Things are open again. And the only thing people really could do were these outdoor things, comedy being one of them. So the pandemic, I think, really helped the Austin comedy scene get on the map. You know,
Yeah.
there's always been this like rich performing culture in Austin, but it's all been kind of like mom and pop. You've had these like music festivals come in, but then they just sold out. So very capitalist driven, very Texas
Yeah.
oil money coming
South by
in.
Southwest. Yeah.
Yeah. And so then all of these shows are opening back up, and then oh, Joe Rogan decided to actually move here and he's buying a club. And so after that, I saw quite a few people from the Comedy Store in LA move out to Austin upon Joe's request.
I will say this: when you moved, again, it was before the mass exodus, and so I just thought, well, it's a cool town. I grew up in Dallas
Yeah.
and spent a lot of time in Austin. All of my friends went to the University of Texas, and I went to this, crappy little liberal arts school in Dallas called the University of Dallas, and so I spent every weekend down in Austin because Austin is by far the coolest town in Texas. So when you move there, of all the places you were going to go in Texas, that certainly made the most sense. But at that point, it wasn't this this comedy sort of new mecca that it became moments after you got there.
I brought the heat. What can I say?
You did.
I brought it. Everyone was just like, Herman's leaving. That's a sign. No, I went in response to like the pandemic, but also, I was making leaps and bounds in my comedy career out here in LA. And I was able to do like shows over in the UK. I got to perform for veterans and, get on like amazing, huge stages and open for crazy, huge artists. And then a couple film projects that about, mutual friends of ours produced that then won several awards. And so that stopping motion in Los Angeles opened up this whole idea in me of, let's try this from a different angle, from a small angle. And I get to Austin, and right when shows are, becoming indoor and everything like that, I was all of a sudden put in headliner positions, and they were just like reading my credits off and everything like that. And I'm like, oh, I guess I have done some cool big stuff, right?
Yeah,
but in Los Angeles, you kind of are like, add it to the list. I still have roommates, kind of a deal. But out there, it's like, oh shit, you were on a show with David Spade. And I'm like, no, I was on a lineup that then had David Spade on it, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah,
a
yeah.
difference. And so that vernacular was so foreign out in Austin because you had these heavy hitters. I mean, Joe Rogan, and then Tony Hinchcliffe came right after that. And then Red Band came after that. And then, Bert Kirshner is a huge, friend of Joe's. And so he was out there all the time, and they're just doing drop-ins on each other's shows and stuff like that. And so then it became this 1 degree separated from the biggest name in town, right?
Right.
So a lot of the comics that were up and coming and still developing, like open mic, still trying to figure out how to write a joke, were doing the Hinchcliffe show and then going on to the local booked pub shows or whatever like that, and using as their credit, performed on Kill Tony.
Right.
Was on the Joe Rogan show. And it was humbling in a way of being like, oh, this is a credit here, because there's not that closeness of conglomerate entertainment industry. And so it's taking what you can. And what I saw in the 2.5 years that I was in Austin is it changed the style of comedy from when I first got there.
Yeah, this, you mentioned this to me at the Improv, and this is what I found the most interesting. And I really want you to bring us through this from what you started out seeing, because I remember you getting there, and I remember you being on a ton of shows, and you know, lots of show flyers. And then it seemed like something changed, and then you come back and you mentioned this to me, that the vibe changed at the end. So this I find very interesting. So take us through this and really kind of share with us what changed and how that affected your experience there.
So when I got there, it was, like I said, all of these like little pop-up shows, like that kind of Austin vibe that you would expect of like, oh my gosh, there's a show in this cool little pub. There's a show, there's a venue, right? And all sorts of comedy, all sorts of different, styles of humor. And then towards the end, and this is kind of when I took a step back from performing and producing shows, because I love putting on a good show, is that I couldn't get a diverse humor, is that I found several performers altering their act to mimic Joe's humor and Tony Hinchcliffe's humor. That kind of, like, Joe, he's very thoughtful, but he does have like crude humor. And then you got Tony, and he's kind of mean spirited. That's his thing. I think Tony's great. I think he's really sweet, but on stage, he's got this persona of this asshole,
Yeah, he's a dick. He's dickish on stage, sure.
Yeah. And so then I saw a bunch of comics developing their jokes to cater to them, to try to get on their shows.
Okay.
Which I found boring.
Okay.
Without trying to knock anybody in their development, but it's just like, wow, you were telling these jokes that I thought were so funny and so weird and so just nobody would have ever thought to word it that way, but now you're wording it in a jock rock shock humor way,
right?
And it also spilled into, so I got really deep into like the female comics. I made top 10 females in Austin to watch. Anyway, there were only 10 of us.
Right, at the time. Exactly.
There
at
were
the time.
But then these like really rich female driven shows, like the G-Spot show by Mary Helen McCarthy, which anytime I did a show was sold out, and she paid, right? And then you go and do like the Vulcan Theater, which was like the secret show, Red Band, and then Joe would hop on that, and Joe's friends, whomever was in town, or like Brian Holtzman, kind of that like aggressive male style, became everything that you see.
Oh.
And it became singular. And that's my experience with like being able to travel around and do these shows in like smaller communities and stuff like that. Like I'm from Kansas, you know, I've performed for 10 people, but that's all the people in town, you know? And
but that's a sold out show.
but that's a
Yeah.
sold out show. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you get their styles of humor, and it's like, oh, if you're not saying something vulgar, people aren't laughing. And I don't know, I kind of in a way got a little over it
Yeah.
in saying, like, I think a good joke writer can hear someone's voice and mimic it, but someone who's not so thought provoking changes who they are. And I think comedy is one of those most beautiful things where it's you crack your head open and you let people see who you are on the inside.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
I think that, you know, Joe going to Austin, fantastic for his career, fantastic for you know, his financial developments, and also what he really truly does want to do for the community, without having that ego of he built that comedy community up or something like that. Is the wake that is following him is now you're just getting a bunch of Joe Rogan comics.
Okay.
know?
So let me ask you this. So for the comic listening to this that's in their developmental phase, is probably a fan of Rogan's, probably a fan of Hinchcliffe, probably a fan of Red Band, but maybe isn't in that style. Do you see Austin as still a great place to go and develop?
If you are coming from small town America and you've got some funny shit in your head, start in Austin. Start there. What I did was I dialed back, right? And I'm not saying I took a step back, because I had an amazing experience, just life lesson wise, living in Austin, enough to where it was like, oh, what I'm doing, producing and career stuff, Austin doesn't understand yet. It will, but not for another 5 or 10 years.
Right.
You know, because like I said, that funnel, that singularity of you got one giant name, you know, doing comedy.
Yeah.
Whereas when you develop and you get some good material written, and you can do 15 minutes and 20 minutes with some crowd work or something, you can navigate in and out, then move to LA, then move to New York, Chicago also. I mean, I don't think enough people talk about the Chicago comedy scene. If you want that still kind of Midwest, that's not LA, not New York. And I mean, you get a lot of improv actors coming out.
Right, exactly. And I think that's why I think Chicago is considered the improv sketch town and not so much a stand-up town. And you know, they don't have a lot of stand-up club, like pro clubs, you know, so I don't think now, I'm sure, I don't know about their on the ground, you know, smaller shows that they have there. They probably have a ton. I don't know.
Yeah.
I haven't been there in forever, but I do think that when people think of Chicago, they think sketch, they think improv.
Yeah. What's cool about that, though, I mean, you get this here in LA too, is like you get some of these giant improv artists coming in and doing their stand-up bits, you know? And you really get to see these huge stars just be talented, you know? Austin, you don't really get to see that because these huge stars aren't just dropping down to Austin to perform. They're getting paid to go to Austin.
Right. They're not doing pub shows. They're not living there. They're not. Yeah.
I don't know. And like I said, there are some amazing, crazy good comics coming out of Austin. And they're all like 25.
Yeah.
So when they get a little more developed, I guarantee they're not going to stay in Austin.
Yeah, and they can't. They can't. At the end of the day, the question does still ultimately come. And even if you build up, I mean, especially if you build up a big audience on social media, then you really at some point have to move to
Yeah.
LA or New York. And
Mhm.
that's a, you know, and the difference between those two are something I will discuss on another podcast. But this has been this is very enlightening, I think. So it is a good place still to go and develop. Do you fear though, or would you caution young comics moving there to stick to their guns about their choice of material, about their voice, about their ideas, and not get sucked in to the Rogen Hinchcliffe funnel?
LA is not for everyone. New York is not for everyone. And if you're a young person or a starting out comic or something and things just aren't lining up out here and you like the country life, I mean, the thing about Austin is it's still in Texas.
That's true. That's very much so. Very much
it's
so.
still in a capital city. It's still very polarized, and it's not welcoming to people moving there. It is not a, oh, that's awesome. You moved here from XYZ. That's awesome. You came out here. What I ran into was, oh, you're another LA person. Great. You're ruining our city. And when I saw what I saw out there, we're like the worst of the worst LA people moving out there. And I'm like, I get it. I understand. I promise it's not me. I grew up milking cows. Like,
yeah, I'm more one of you. I just happen to my way of, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not saying like my story is the way to go, is that I had lived in LA for 8 years before deciding to move to Texas for a couple years. And I really did want to build something similar to what I was doing out here, in fair treatment of artists, getting, lower named developing performers actual good stage time. And it just hasn't caught on out there yet. And the clubs that have been developing are still thoroughly bro-y, we grew up and went to high school together centric.
Oh,
and
wow.
I think that when you are a comic, it should be on the top of your head to want to connect to a variety of people. Is that the beginning of the day and the end of the day, your job as a comic is to make people laugh, make people forget about the bullshit that's happening outside. And that good old boy culture hasn't yet shed from the Austin scene.
Wow. Interesting. So, in conclusion, is there, I mean, what is the future for the Austin scene? Does it continue to thrive? Does it eventually recede? Does everybody end up coming back here? Do more people where do you think it's going?
I think it is going in what has been proving to happen in Austin, is that it's going to be bought. Is like your ACL, your South by Southwest, all got bought by huge conglomerates. So I do see giant acts coming through and doing stadium shows, doing that kind of a thing. And what that's going to do to the local scene is, one, it's going to build them up a little bit, but it's also not going to let people spread out, So, because you're going to have this heavy head of stadium performers. People are like, oh, why go to a local comedy show when Whitney Cummings is coming to town, right?
Right.
And that happened a lot. Is, these comedy clubs were probably only able to hold 150 to 200 people most. And comedy shows never really packed them out. Even the Joe Rogan shows, I mean, there were still, maybe it was like COVID, but even those shows were at cap, but not waiting around the block. Like what we see out here, kind of a thing.
Yeah.
But it is one of those things where a lot of the comedy goers, comedy lovers, go to have that taste of fame. I got to see a famous person, right? And I think the difference is like out here or like New York, we can talk, you know, you can talk about that. And another thing is people go to comedy clubs to see no names.
Right.
You know, they go because they're like, I'm cutting edge. I want to know a person before everybody else does.
Right. I want to see the next guys that no one's talking about yet.
Yeah. And you'll see this a lot. I mean, I still follow all the boys in Austin, and I'm seeing the same exact comics on every show, the same exact, and I'm like looking at the local things, I'm following the smaller shows, and it's like all about, you know, this person, all about that person.
Right.
And it's like, well, I say go do it, because experiences can only lead to better material.
Yeah,
you
absolutely. Know? That's awesome.
Like you and I were talking about this the other night at the Improv, is that I'm kind of in this, I'm getting rid of all of my old jokes and writing a completely new.
Right.
I'm in that phase of comedy hood.
You're turning over the soil. You're turning over the soil.
God, maybe I'll dig up some old jokes that I wrote 5 years ago and see if they work now.
Maybe.
But that's the thing, is I went out there without a second thought. I was just like, well, let's go try a new city.
It just happened to be the city about to explode, and right underneath you.
I think it is exploding. I think it's blowing up right now as we speak. In fact, it's on fire right now. Yeah, I think it is. It just, anybody that wants to go out there, if I'm able to give advice, is
please do.
Keep your voice. Keep who you are. Don't change it to get on a show with the only famous person in town.
Right.
Because I guarantee there are way more people who will find you funny that are not in that city.
Right. You know? Wow.
And that is what's going to get you on a tour. That is what's going to get you publicity, or if you do commercials or interesting things, they're not looking at another run of the mill. People are looking at who are you, and why are you important? Yeah. You know, because everybody's important.
Yeah. And I say that a lot in my workshops about how, you know, I say it in my free workshop where I talk about, listen, you have to do comedy your way. If you do it trying to do what you think they are looking for, by the time you get there, it's going to change, you know? And the only way for this, you know, comedy is a life's journey, and the only way for you to really enjoy it the entire way is to just do it the way that you enjoy it. You know, if you start doing it the way you think it should be done, the way you think people are looking for, then it becomes work. Then it becomes something that you may not wind up ultimately enjoying and wind up quitting because, you know, you thought you did what they wanted to do and they didn't buy it, and now you're not happy. You know, you want to be happy. Do comedy your way, enjoy your process, and always stick to your voice. So
absolutely. And unapologetically laugh, you know?
Yeah.
I think part of being a comic is spending so much time around comedy, and you get this like,
oh, that's the word. Absolutely.
Waiting to go up.
Waiting
to go up.
No,
and
this is great.
When there's a good joke, every comic in the back of their heads should be saying the same thing. Oh, it was a good joke. Why didn't I write it? And that should bring joy. Because that's the thing.
And yes, and I say it all the time. You want it to be a good show, be a good audience member. You know, because then when you're up there, and they'll laugh for you. If you laugh for them, they'll laugh for you. You know, and so many times we did the jealousy. It's fine if you're, of course we all are, especially when it's something that's right there. Like, how did I not see that? You know, then there isn't, but that doesn't mean you don't laugh, enjoy yourself, and, you know, and always do. And your own comedy should make you laugh. Your own comedy should be stuff that you think is funny, and you should allow yourself to improvise and come up with things that you think are funny. And so, yes, allow yourself to laugh. I think that's really a beautiful point, because sometimes we allow the jealousy to control, and we play make me laugh. We find ourselves suppressing the laughter to be like, no, I'm not going to look. I don't, you know, no, let it out, enjoy it. You enjoy their comedy, they'll enjoy yours, and the whole experience elevates for everyone.
Well, and it's this. it's a community, and I know some huge comics are out there now talking about the comedy community. The comedy friends are some of the best people because we've been through shit together and we've learned how to laugh about it, you know.
Yeah.
But you gotta also be part of it, you know.
Yeah.
You
want them
gotta
to laugh
be,
at you, you got to be
yeah.
willing to laugh at them. Yep.
And when you're on shows that you're producing yourself, which is the best way to get stage time, I'm
Big tip.
an advocate for that.
I say it all the time too. Yep. You
Is
want
that
stage time? Create it.
you want people to come be on your show that are good? You're going to have to be good to them. So,
There you go. Wow. Excellent.
yeah.
So much fun. So listen, wonderful to see you. Always, I'm so glad to have you back in Los Angeles. I look forward to running into you again more at the
Yes.
stages around LA and watching you perform and loving. We're seeing you develop this next hour. And and thank you for sharing this insight into the Austin scene and what's going on there, and whether or not what it might mean to young comedians that are developing and comedians that are kind of already developed. If it's a move worthwhile for them, I feel like this has been a ton of very insightful, useful information. So thank you so very much for joining me.
And quick plug.
Go for it.
We're working on a podcast. It is a comedy podcast with my comedy friend, Alex Mandelberg. It is called What Had Happened. We will be releasing it early this summer. It's a history podcast where we try to recall stories from memory, and then we check each other. And at the end of the season, there's a winner. So
okay, that's great. And where can people find you on social media?
All right, they can find me on social media, Instagram at Isabel Herrman. If you go there, it has links to everything else.
And that's Herrman with 2 R's, right?
Herrman with 2 R's. ISABELHERRMAN.
There we go. All right. Well, thank you so very much. And as always, if you're interested in learning the craft of comedy, go to thecomedyinstitute.com. I have a new streaming class. Mastering Stand-Up is now available on Teachable, and all the links are on that website. You can also follow me at Greg Romero Wilson. Thank you so much once again. Always a pleasure to spend any time I can with you. Okay, darling? You take care of yourself.
Love you too, Greg.
Welcome back to Los Angeles.
Thank
all
you.
The comedians out there listening, you guys enjoy the journey, have fun, and be good to each other. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.